Hi and welcome to the course. My name is Scott Harris and I thought I'd do this introductory video just to kind of introduce you guys to myself, who I am, and tell you about the course, tell you how you should do the course, how you should move through the course, and also that we can kind of, even though I don't get to know you guys very well, that you get to know me, and that hopefully it will be a beneficial experience for you moving through this course. So first things first, I really feel like this course is my masterwork probably of all the kind of course content that I've ever done. It's got so many valuable elements to it that have to do with character design and drawing characters comprehensively, drawing characters well, drawing characters appealingly. And as you move through the course, I think you're going to find that this isn't a course that you kind of, you do the whole course, and maybe you've had experience before, you do a course and you feel like, there were one or two good nuggets of information in that course. I'm hoping that you'll feel like, wow, this course really took me maybe from somewhere where you didn't know how to draw characters at all to like, now I really feel like I know what I'm doing. Or if you have started drawing a bit, or you're intermediate at drawing, you feel like, wow, this has amped up my skills so much. And that also that these concepts, these very core concepts, as they become part of how you draw, you feel like, wow, this course was worth it for me. That is my hope, and I really do hope, that you guys really become great character artists and are able to draw in a multitude of styles and any kinds of characters you want, with appeal, with feeling, with story, with emotion, and what have you. So that's kind of how I feel about the course and how I want to kind of present the course to you. And also that the course presentation, while the theories and the concepts are going to be pretty serious in tone, I'm going to be presenting the course very much in a casual kind of way, as if I were teaching you in a class. So I don't think you need to stress about, hectic theoretical studies or anything like that, but definitely I'll do my best to be as clear and concise as possible so that you're grasping the theories quickly and that you can then proceed to practice them and do exercises to kind of get them into your system and get used to them. So how I envision you guys doing the course is you watch all the videos first one time, right? You go through every single video, you watch them, you don't do any exercises, you just watch, you learn, you try to absorb, right? And then on your second run through, you go through the course and you do all the exercises. It's extremely crucial that you put in the time and the dedication to drawing out all the exercises, doing the drawings required in each of the sections. And the reason is, whilst art is definitely extremely more theoretical than people think it is, I would liken it perhaps, let's say, to playing a musical instrument. You may know everything there is to know about a guitar or a particular instrument. You may know all the theory, all the music theory, but if you don't pick up a guitar and play it, the theory's kind of useless. At the same time, using the same kind of analogy, you can realize that, a lot of people will say, well, how do you get better at art? And they'll reply and they'll be like, oh, you just practice more. Well, if you could imagine yourself picking up a guitar and you just think, well, the more I keep strumming, I'm going to learn to become a better guitarist. Obviously, that's not going to happen, right? That's not the case. You're going to need the theory. So there is a duality, if you wish, or equilibrium between theory and practical when it comes to art. And hopefully this course will have you engaging comprehensively in both things. All right, I guess that's about it for the introduction to the course. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you have a good time. I hope that you definitely keep in touch with me, keep in contact with me, send me your artwork, send me your exercises as you're doing the course, and I wish you all the best. I'm very optimistic and hopeful that this course is going to be absolutely awesome for you. So let's get started. Enough chit chat, let's get started. Awesome. Welcome to Theory versus Practical, the video on theory versus practical. Now you might be thinking, well, dude, you just talked about this in the intro. You used the guitar example, guitar, music, instrument, music theory. Well, I want to really reinforce how you think about art theory and art practical. There is a big kind of conception in art that to be better as an artist, you have to put in the time and you have to just draw and practice every day. And somehow you're going to figure out things over time and you're going to get better. Sure, that can work over maybe 10 or 15 years. Do you want to spend 10 or 15 years learning to draw characters? I didn't think so. Right. So the reason I wanted to add this video into the course and really push the point is how I want you guys to think about art theory and art practical, right? You need both. Both are very important, okay? And both are equally important. So that's the first main thing, that both are equally important. But the way I want you to think about it is that you want to get to a destination, right? Let's say you're looking for treasure, okay? Argument's sake, you're a pirate, you're looking for treasure, right? What do pirates have to get to the treasure? They have a treasure map, right? They have directions. They have directions that show them sort of step by step, or have some kind of chronology or logical flow of how they are going to get to that treasure, how they're going to get to that goal. Art theory is very much the same thing in a way. You need the art theory, not just the theory itself, you know, that they're just all floating little bubbles, you know, anatomies up there, perspectives here and there, and everything's floating little bubbles. No, you need the theory in the correct order, with everything in its right place, that you can follow step by step and learn step by step structurally from the foundations up to the advanced stuff. So that once you've building these kind of foundations, building sort of the pyramid, which we'll go into just now, that you understand that, and that you know that you have a clear direction and that you can get to your goal easily by thinking about your map, right? How do I do this? What is the structure of these various elements of art? So I just wanted to make this video just to reinforce that point. Don't think art theory is minimal and practical is everything. You really need both. You really need to become fluent in both. And definitely you need to focus on ingesting, absorbing, learning the theories and being very strong in your theory. So that when it comes to practical, even if maybe your practical ability is a little bit weak, you know that you can rely on the theory, look at what you need to fix, check the boxes of the theory, and come out at the end of the day with a good drawing. So once again, art theory, very, very important as art practical. Welcome to Let's Get Messy. And what is Let's Get Messy, right? Why am I adding this random video into the introduction section? And Let's Get Messy is really an encouragement to you to be messy, to be untidy, to be loose, to be rough when you're drawing, right? I've done this course in a way where I don't want you to feel like, wow, I could never achieve the drawings that I'm seeing in these videos. No, I haven't done the course in a way where you've got these refined, perfectly drawn examples, perfectly drawn exercises, perfectly drawn things that you feel like, well, I can't achieve this level of perfection, right? No, I've done the course in a way that is loose, that is messy, that is rough, yet the elements of the theory are correct. The elements of the theory are strong, and I will show you how to move from rough and messy to refined and neat and beautiful and tidied up and clean and professional work, right? But I want to encourage you as you're starting the course, start letting go of trying to make perfect drawings, right? Start letting go of it. Be rough when you're doing exercises. Be rough. When you're trying to work things out, be rough, be loose. Let yourself be wild and free and fast, okay? Let's get messy. Let's get really messy. Think about this. A construction site is filthy, yet it's building houses, it's building buildings, it's messy. I mean, it's not filthy as in dirt, it's just filthy and it's messy, it's chaos, there's construction equipment everywhere, workers everywhere, you know, things aren't painted, finishings aren't put in. You've got to think like that. Same thing with the kitchen. You know, a good baker, a good cook, they do not operate in these pristine kitchens like you see on TV shows. They're messy and they're throwing flavors around and food around, and they're getting messy and they're getting into it and they're getting their hands dirty. And when you're building something great, you've got to get your hands dirty. And then you can use the refinement stage to make those things neat and clear and nice and beautiful and professional. Because really, professional look and professional feeling comes from solid construction, and construction is messy. So let me encourage you, let's get messy, let's get rough, let's get to the core truths of art. And then once we've got the stuff down and the solid foundations down, then we can focus on kneading it up, tidying it up, painting those buildings, icing those cakes, for a metaphor. All right, let's get messy, let's move on. Hey guys, and welcome to the Art Basics video. This is the very first video in the course, and we're just going to talk about 3 basic things in a very simple way at first, and then the next video is going to really expand your thinking of these things. So the first thing we want to talk about is shape, and what we mean when we're talking about shape. All right. Shape really refers to 2D or iconographic shapes, right? Iconographic. So really something like this type of circle or a square, you know, anything that's kind of 2D flat, kind of on the page, something like that, that's a shape. You know, all of these things can be shapes. These are shapes, right? The shape of things, right? The basic sort of fundamental shape of something. So even something that is 3D, let's say, for example, let's just do kind of a more of a 3D head design here, right? That's sort of just a basic head layout. Even the design of this has a basic shape to it that the viewer will see. All right. So really just that kind of basic shape. If you shaded it in, you know, that it was flat and no longer 3D, it has that kind of shape to it. So that's what shape is, 2D shapes or iconographic shapes. Even perhaps 2D is too much. They're very flat. It's almost like 1D because you really only see one side of a shape. Like a shape is just sort of a one-sided type of thing. All right. The next thing we want to look at is form, right? And what we mean by forms. Okay. So form is really 3D shapes, multiple sides. Okay. So we can see multiple sides of the object. So then we start using words like sphere, right? So we can imagine that as a ball, right? As a sphere or cube. Okay, so these are forms and so forth. And anything, we can try to turn anything into a form by kind of giving it multiple sides. So now I've added an ellipse to the end of this thing, and now maybe it looks like some kind of horn, right? So it's kind of got more form to it. So we can see that there are multiple sides, and these are forms. And things that generally form part of form theory is stuff like perspective, which helps us understand kind of a virtual spatial area, right? So it gives us space to build things in, and things like lighting, right? When we kind of add light and shadow to things, we're kind of indicating form. You know, for example, if we keep this side light and we put this side in shadow, the viewer can then perceive via these two planes, these two different lit planes, that this is one side and this is another side. So that is form. And then last but not least, we have this category called detail, right? And detail, for the most part, things like textures, right? Textures and material types, which basically inform the textures, material types, and things like color, all right? So these things form the textures, the material types, the color. And for example, if this were our form, and we can see that this form has this shape to it, which is really something like that. Okay. And we could then say, well, let's make this a stone block, and I'll add some textures to it and maybe mess up its edges a little bit so it looks more stony and rock-like. And obviously if I added a color to it, gray or what have you, that would be the detail section. All right, so in the next video we're going to discuss this in depth, but basically this is the structure of art in many ways. We have shape at the bottom, then form, then detail. Take note of how much space each of these categories occupies on this sort of theoretical pyramid here, and it will really help you understand what the most important parts of your art are. All right, let's deep dive this in the next video. I'll see you there. All right, as we start the art fundamentals section, we're going to take a look at shape, form, and detail. And this is really just to kind of solidify how you understand the structure of art and to kind of, I suppose, give you some perspectives on how to see art perhaps in three different ways, right? So the first thing that I'm going to kind of illustrate here is this triangle. And the triangle is made of three parts. It's kind of like in order of importance, right? And at the bottom, we have shape. In the middle, we have form. And at the top, we have details, all right? And when we're talking about each of these categories, what we really want to think of is all the art theory that's related to these three sort of major categories of art. So shape, for example, is about composition. It's about your 2D iconographic shapes. It's about the dynamism of your shapes. It's about the read of your shapes, about silhouettes and all those various elements, right? And of course, composition is extremely foundational, right? It's about the shape of your lights and so on. Form basically deals with perspective, light, and drawing in 3D in terms of, are you establishing solid forms that make sense in a space, and that space is defined by perspective, right? And in terms of lighting, are you lighting objects in a way that you can see their form? So form is related to everything that gives us a perception of three-dimensionality. And then lastly, details refers to sort of your textures, your literal smaller details of objects, as well as the color of things. All right. So the way you kind of want to understand art theory, the way art theory is sort of structurally built, is in this shape, form, details kind of model, where shape is the most important consideration theoretically, then form, and then details. All right. But let's just take this, move it to the side here, and add another triangle. We're going to have three triangles, three different ways that you guys should think about kind of the structure of art, right? Let's put another triangle here. Actually, let's just make these a little bit smaller so we can fit the third one nicely. All right. Now, the second kind of way that you want to think about art, so this is the theoretical, let's call it hierarchy. Okay, so when you're drawing, you want to be thinking about shape first, then form, then details in terms of what is structurally important to the piece. However, your implementation theory, this is how you actually are going to work, right? How you're practically going to work. So we can just call this practical as well, right? And this is basically shape and form happening simultaneously. Sorry, mind you, let's call it form and shape. That's because, and then lastly, this would be details, right? And the reason it's form and shape is to the viewer, and we'll do the viewer's triangle just now, but basically we need to be drawing 3D objects as realists, right? So we're doing imaginative realism, or representational art as it's called. And so everything we do needs to be three-dimensional, make sense in time, in space, in a place with lighting and so on, right? And so we always need forms. But we can see from the theoretical hierarchy that shape is extremely important. So we need to draw the forms, but then let shape inform the 2D shapes of the forms, so the silhouettes of those forms, right? Nevertheless, we'll get into this a little bit deeper later on in terms of when we're doing practical drawing and things like that. But it's important to know that we want to approach how we draw, like our practical side of drawing, as both form and shape happening at the same time. We're thinking about these at the same time. And then once we've got that down, then we do details, right? And the details in terms of drawing could really be the refined process. And that would be like clean lines and all the details and the nice beautiful hairlines, and this would be your rough or your plan process, right? So here you can see kind of a little picture into the workflow of how we would draw. We do a rough and a plan, which would embody form and shape, and then the refined drawing on top would draw on those forms and shapes that we've done, adding the details to them, and then we'd have a nice completed drawing. Okay, so just a way to think about it, right? This is our theoretical hierarchy. This is our implementation theory, and implementation hierarchy, if you wish. We start with form and shape, and then we do details. And actually, let me just really clarify this. The details are always a lot simpler to do once you've got a solid foundation. So I think a lot of beginner artists especially, they will worry about the details very much, but this is kind of how we want to kind of weight our work when it comes to actually doing the practical side of drawing, right? Lots of work on the forms and the shapes, and then you don't need that much work on the details to finish up. Although ironically, as a side note, this is really the 80-20 rule. So they say 80% of the work takes 20% of the time to do. So you can see 80% of the work here is form and shape. It's only going to take 20% of the time to do. And conversely, the details, even though they're sort of 20% of like the thought and the theory, they're going to take 80% of the time to do, because you'll end up spending much more time refining the drawing. But you can only do that on a very solid foundation, right? Which is form and shape. All right, and then the last triangle, which is, it's just nice and fairly straightforward to understand, is how the viewer sees. So let's just say the viewer's perspective. And this is important to know, just so that you have a kind of a good, well-rounded understanding of the sort of, you know, the theoretical structure of art theory, art practical, and also how the viewer sees things. So the viewer really sees things, I would say, in a combined way, but generally speaking, they'll see things kind of as forms, and this would be halved like that, I would say. Forms and then details. And viewers, typically, they're not looking at shape composition and composition. I'm talking about your sort of typical average viewer, even when you yourself are looking at artworks. You know, you have this mode of art appreciation, and that mode is much different from sort of art analysis. Because when you're looking at a piece that you really like, or you've got artwork, a little artwork folder or artwork collection or something, right? Or maybe it's a big folder, who knows, where you've got collected artworks. When you look at stuff that you like, you kind of are enamored by it. You're sold. It's managing to persuade you of its believability. And so you're really noticing the forms first, and then the details second. And you can kind of see here in this sort of third triangle. Let's just kind of label these 1, 2, and 3. Oh, actually, perhaps that's not a good idea. Let's just call it A, B, and C, right? You'll kind of notice in this third triangle why, excuse me, why beginners struggle so much when they're starting to draw, right? Because they're going on what they've seen, and what they've only seen and believed to be true about the world is basically the forms and the details, and they're generally equally weighted. So they'll kind of try and draw something that looks like a head and then fill it with a million details. You know, that's kind of a common beginner problem. But nevertheless, how we see things is different from how we make things, and is different from the theory of things. So another way to understand this is kind of the recipe of a cake, right, is quite substantially different from how you actually make the cake, right? And quite substantially different, that is, to how you taste the cake, right? So there's kind of an analogy in there, and hopefully that's helpful to you. So this is essentially the kind of structure of art, right? And all artworks really fit into this, not just drawing. You know, drawings, paintings, landscapes, portraits, and so on. Character designs, vehicle designs, everything really kind of fills into this kind of structure when we're looking at how art is made. Nevertheless, that is pretty much the end of this lesson. And we're going to move on to technicalities versus emotional impact, which is kind of a high-level topic in some senses. But hopefully this has helped you understand the structures and really constantly revisit this video, and especially focus on point 2 as to how we needed to implement form and shape at the same time, then details. And please know that we will get into detail on these shape elements as we move through the course. So you will know what shape really means, what forms really mean, what details really mean as we move through the course. Cool, catch you in the next lesson. In learning to see as an artist, we want to use our theoretical model of shape, form, and detail when we're observing the world and try and view things that we see in reality in this way, which will help us grab the details, grab the structure, grab the designs of what it is that we're looking for, and get it into our minds and have us really understand things in a more complex way and less of a simplistic way when we're observing the world around us. And the first way we really want to look at things is looking at things in purely a shape way, where we're kind of ignoring inner details and ignoring lighting and three-dimensionality, and we're really just kind of looking primarily first at the overall silhouette of objects. And I'll draw out her silhouette here in a general sense. And we're looking at the shapes formed by the silhouette and the asymmetry of that silhouette. And then also going into the features and then looking at the basic flat 2D shapes that are being made on a particular object that we're observing, and kind of starting to recognize just these flat shapes and look at things in this flat way. That's not to say that you want to learn things in this flat way, but rather that we want to use what we understand of these flat kind of shapes to help us understand proportions very well. So here I'm kind of just putting lines around the big shapes, the big inner shapes, and just getting these very flat, two-dimensional objects out of them, particularly on the face, and we will cover facial proportions later on. Just grasping these basic flat shapes helps us position them, size them, and space them correctly on the face so that we can have appealing looking faces and proportionately pleasing faces. So really all of these shapes, for example, this really random asymmetrical shape here, the shape here, the shape here, this weird shape at the top, this is just a way we want to look at objects, a perspective or a lens, if you wish, that we want to look at objects in the real world first. We want to look at just the general shapes that are being formed first. Moving on from that, we want to then start looking at the forms. And the forms are really the 3D elements defined by perspective and lighting, and start really trying to grasp what are the basic forms that are underlying these elements. So for example, in the head, we might say, all right, well, there's a sort of a spherical form here, and these forms come down here. There's kind of a jaw-shaped form, and there's the form of the ears. And imagining what the back sides of objects would look like and the sides of objects, and getting a sense of the planes. So for example, in her head here, this is the front plane, this is the side plane. Kind of feeling out the forms here, here, and kind of imagining what is the mass and the volume of the structure of just the basic form structure of her back and her chest here, and drawing through things in your mind and imagining, for example, the arm. Maybe the arm is really just a cylinder, right? Just a cylinder, and then the hand itself may be some kind of block. And looking at objects in reality and imagining what are their basic forms. So here we have perhaps another cylinder again, and the forearm as well is another cylinder, and I'm drawing through here to kind of feel out these cylindrical shapes of the arms. So we want to have a form sense when we're looking at things in the world. And then finally, once we've observed the shapes and the forms, and we're getting a feel for the forms and the three-dimensional forms, three-dimensionality of the objects, we then can take a look at the details, the color of the shirt, the texture of the skin, the color of the lips, the detailing of the teeth, for example, the details in her eyes, the details of her hair, the hair strands, and all the little fine details, really looking at things like texture and things like color, and kind of getting a feel for those things. And really, they're the last things that we really want to be concerned with when we're working. And so this is how we want to learn to see objects. We want to look at the shapes, then the forms, and then the details, and constantly be observing and studying things in this way, breaking down these complex elements into these basic categories and helping us to really observe the world more like artists and really capture and be inspired by the things that we see in reality. Let's move on. In this lesson, we're going to look at technicalities versus emotional impact. Now, right off the bat, emotional impact, that is a piece that has a lot of emotion to it. It has a mood, it has a story, and it has feeling. A piece with these emotional elements will always win out over a piece that is more technically correct, but lacking in these emotional elements. You know, technicalities often occur, for example, when someone critiques your work or you've seen work being critiqued, where someone will say, hey, that arm is drawn incorrectly or that head is on skew or something like that. However, if the piece has enough of an emotive element to it, enough feeling in it, a lot of the time this causes a blindness in the viewer, so to speak, perhaps even a willing blindness, that they're willing to disregard the technical incorrectness just because of the joy that they're feeling or the the emotions that they're feeling from that particular piece, right? The feelings that they're getting from the piece. Now, that's not to say that we should abandon all technical rules and things like that, but rather that by understanding how weighty the emotive elements of a piece are, that we can use this knowledge to leverage it in a very similar way to the way that poets leverage poetic license, right? Where they're making up words and things that don't exist. The words are not technically correct, yet the poets use it in such a way that it really just adds to the poem. And, you know, we don't really look at it and people don't go, well, look at this fool making up these random words. You know, this doesn't exist. Is this guy educated? No, we go, wow, that's a pretty cool made up word and that's awesome. So we kind of want to leverage the emotional impact of our pieces and of course definitely instill as much story, feeling and emotion in our work as possible, therefore sort of freeing us in some respects to not being so hard on ourselves about the technical aspects of a particular piece. So the last thing that I want to say as well is that you're going to find, as we discuss this later on, that this relates a lot to believability and realism and the difference between these two things and which one is more important in an artwork. So let's go to the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the story is everything. Now, I know that perhaps at this stage of the course, you're thinking like, wow, man, this is wordy. Are we ever going to do some drawing? Trust me, most of the course is drawing related, but this stuff is very, very important to know, to have in your mind, to learn, to digest. So really take this seriously and consider it very, very important. All right, so the story, right? The first big point is vision, right? If you've done the Art Fundamentals course, or even if you haven't, it doesn't really matter. Vision is your preconception or your conceptualizing of the character that you're drawing. Thinking about who the character is, where is the character perhaps in the present scene, what worlds do they live in, what is their personality, what is the story of the piece that you're currently drawing, what is the feeling, what is the mood, what is the expression on their face, what is the piece communicating. The story is extremely, 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 extremely important to creating a piece that is emotive. And as we've learned in the technicalities versus emotional impact lesson, emotional impact is crucial in creating a piece that is appealing. Ultimately, we really want to create works that are appealing. We want our work to have appeal. That is the ability to persuade someone to look at it and to maintain their looking at it and give them some joy or fully communicate the message of the piece to them in an effective way that they find satisfying. Now, one of the most important things I could ever tell you about art, and I'm going to do my best to make this as clear as possible, is to have you realize that the artwork itself is just the medium, right? Perhaps it seems obvious, right? But let me give you some examples. A book is a medium, a movie is a medium, a newspaper is a medium, a magazine is a medium, right? Art is a medium, music is a medium, right? These are just mediums. The artwork that you end up with in many ways is just the medium, right? The message, however, is that thing that you're communicating through the medium, right? And the message is very, very, very important. As I tell students constantly, make something cool, don't make a cool artwork, right? Don't think about the artwork. Think about the thing. Have your thoughts on the thing itself that you're creating. In our case, characters, right? Think deeply about the character, who the character is, what the character's wearing, where the character's at, what their personality is, and so on and so forth, right? Making something cool is much more important than making a cool artwork, right? The concept in itself should be good. It should be able to be described with 100 keywords. You know you have a poor message if there are only a few keywords that could be attributed to what is communicated through the medium. You know, if you design a great character, it should be able to be communicated effectively and appealingly through any medium. Let's say for argument's sake, a 3D model, or in a book, or in a comic book, or in a painting, a beautiful painting. The character's concept itself should hold most of the appeal, and your implementation of that should be, you know, sufficient enough to adequately describe and do justice to the concept that you've come up with. So once again, artwork is a medium. It's not the message. And the message is extremely, extremely important. And in our case, the message is the story, and the story is everything, right? The story is everything, especially when we're talking about character artwork. Hope that was really clear. Let's move on. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about drawing for appeal. Now, I have mentioned the word appeal before, and I've mentioned that our work needs to be appealing. But where this really comes from is between contrasting two different ideas, right? And the first idea is believability. The second is realism. Do we try to draw for the sake of realism, or do we try to draw for the sake of believability? And which is more important? Well, hopefully the answer is obvious. Something can be very real or very realistic, be drawn very accurately, very technically correct. But if it lacks believability, something that is worse off in those categories but is more believable will always win out. We want to remember this when we're creating our characters, that believability in perhaps their clothing, their pose, what they're doing, who they are, is much more of a meaningful factor than them looking realistic. The reason I wanted to talk about this is I find that a lot of students tend to get caught up on this idea of realism. You know, is this thing realistic? Is what I'm drawing realistic? I'm trying to make it so realistic, or I'm struggling to make it realistic. And that is not really the problem. The problem is that you need to find out how to make what you're drawing believable. This goes again to poetic license, in a sense, where you could draw anatomy a little off. But if it's a little off yet believable, or completely accurate yet unbelievable, people are always going to find the more believable drawing more appealing, right? So really think about this, contemplate it yourself. It's just some small little section I wanted to pop in there. Consider to yourself the differences between believability and realism. Think on it, digest a little bit more. In this lesson, I'd like to just touch on a few points about maturity as an artist that I hope will be encouraging to you and also just really help you on your journey of becoming a great character artist. The first point is that I want to encourage you to be very selfish about your art. And when I say selfish, I don't mean not loving to others. What I mean is really do the work you want to do. Focus on your own work. Don't worry about other people's work. Don't worry about comparing yourself to other people's art. You could never be them. You could never do what they do simply because you aren't them. Focus on your own work. Focus on your own style. Focus on your own art goals. That is very, very important. When you look at someone else's work, perhaps an artist you feel might be better than you, look at it in an appreciative sense and also see what you can learn. But if there's something I want to caution you against, never, ever, ever, ever compare yourself to another artist. Once again, you are not that person. It is very, very likely that it is impossible for you to do work in the exact same way that they do it. It's just not possible. You're not them. You are you. So focus on your own work and your own self, in a sense, in terms of how you create art. Create art that you want to do, and in doing so, you're not pandering to the art that you think people want to see or that might impress others. Do art that impresses you. I think that's primarily what I want you to get from when I say be very selfish with your artwork. Create artwork that impresses you and that meets the standards that you would want of yourself. Next, I'd like to talk about fear. Now, I'm no stranger to fear in art, although I have to say these days I don't really worry about it that much. Of course, we will all experience fear in art and art making to some extent. The first thing I want to say is that if you have the time, if you have the inclination, and if you have the funds to do it, definitely buy a book called Art and Fear. It will be very, very helpful to you on your art journey, and it's definitely an excellent read, and it covers many of the fears that artists typically feel, right? So definitely consider buying Art and Fear. It is a great resource. It is a very valuable resource for you. The second thing is you're going to have to learn as you're drawing and painting that failure isn't something to be feared, right? Failure is actually wonderful. Think about a kid who burns himself on the stove for the first time, right? At that moment, sure, it does suck. I mean, he's burned himself and that's horrible, but he has learned something pretty valuable from that experience, and it's unlikely that he's going to make that mistake again, right? So what I want to encourage you to do is start becoming fearless. Be courageous. Be brave. Don't stare at the blank page in trepidation. Don't worry about drawing or put it off or procrastinate because you're worried it might not be good. Who cares about good? What is good? I mean, do we have various ideals and standards of what we feel good is? It may vary from person to person. As long as you're learning the theory, you're practicing daily based on the theory, you will gain skill in art. So you don't need to worry about being good or that creating a good piece. Just create the work you want to create. And over time, you will reach a place where you realize that you've gotten to where you wanted to be in your art. Ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to. You're going to want to be somewhere, and you're going to have to take a journey to get there. So let go of your fear. Maybe it's too easy to say that to you, to let go of your fear. But I want to encourage you. You need to be courageous. You need to be brave. And more importantly, you need to be willing to fail. You need to be willing to fail a lot. If you're unwilling to fail and you don't like the taste of failure, perhaps art isn't for you. Lastly, I want to talk about the fear related to technical ability. That is your ability to draw good lines, to understand forms, to implement the theory correctly. Technical ability is very much a learned thing. It is very much a learned thing. You learn the theory, you implement exercises, you grind it into your brain, and eventually it becomes a part of you. When it becomes a part of you, you start doing drawings, people look at your work, and they think it's magic coming out of that pencil. But really, it's just repetition of the theory, constantly hammering it into your brain, that you're able to eventually make it a part of you. So I want you to not be afraid of doing art because you're worried about your technical ability. It really is a technical thing. Once again, remember, art is a medium. So when you're learning how to implement in this medium, it really is just a process of, well, this works and this doesn't work. I also want to add that, when we're talking about character drawing, we're talking about anything that's kind of realist, right? We're differentiating ourselves substantially from people who do abstract art and postmodern art and those other types of art forms. We really are realists, and the beauty about realism is rules. You learn the rules, you implement the rules, you get better at art. So really don't fear drawing and creating art and perhaps even completing this course because you're worried about your technical ability. You'll see after the course is complete that you will have the tools you need, the theoretical tools you need to start practicing and refining your technical ability into just a beautifully crafted, let's say, weapon of art, if you wish. You'll find that the course will provide you with plenty of tools that you can use to really refine your technical ability to something really beautiful and something that really works for you. In this lesson, we're going to talk about art studies versus art creation, perhaps not even versus. What is the difference between these two things? Now, it's actually really important that we have a very clear idea in our mind what art studies are and what art creation is, because this is actually going to tie in to kind of our fear levels about art. And make no mistake, there is plenty of fear in creating art. Right, so art studies is artwork that we do to learn, right? Exercises, sketches in our sketchbooks, gesture drawings when we're at a coffee shop, concept sketches and roughs, before we do the proper concept design sheets for a character and so on. That's what art studies are done for. They're done for our own selves, generally speaking. They're done to learn. They're done to observe things, to kind of make visual notes. That's what art studies are. And so, especially when you're doing art studies exercises, I want to encourage you, please don't be afraid to draw or worry about what it looks like. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. What matters is that you're making good observational and visual notes on what you're doing. So that's what art studies are. Art creation, on the other hand, of course, is the creation of the main artwork, right? It's not created for learning, though you will learn things when you're creating stuff. But art creation is the process of creating a beautiful piece of art, hopefully an appealing piece of art with a good, strong story. So just a quick note, just a quick video on making sure in your mind you've got it very clearly divided. Art studies is one thing. Art creation is another thing. And when you're working, make sure you know what you're doing. Am I doing a study or am I making art? If you're making art, you want to be in one mindset. And if you're doing studies, you want to be in a totally fearless other mindset. Let's take a quick look at observational art and imaginative art, what the differences are, and also how they link together. So observational art is basically artwork that is done by observing something, recreating it on the page, and then kind of possibly adding your own twists to it, dramatizing it a little bit. But mainly the artwork is created by referencing something directly. Imaginative art, on the other hand, is done primarily out of your head, right? You're imagining things, ideas, places, characters, and so forth, and then trying to implement them onto the page. Now, imaginative art requires a lot of theory. You need to really have a firm grip on theory so that you know how to implement and also fix the imaginative artworks that you're creating. Observational art is extremely useful for imaginative artists, and this course is really about imaginative art, imaginative character art, that is, because we use observation in our studies. When we're studying clothing, when we're studying posing, when we're studying anatomy, when we're studying hairstyles, observational art is a massive study tool for us. However, the observational art isn't the actual art for us, and that is a very key point. So, in this course, we are firmly imaginative artists, but both imaginative and observational artists make use of references, whether the reference is visual information in your mind or visual information in front of you. And of course, there are definitely artists who use both, where they're mixing elements of reality with elements of imagination. Hey guys, and welcome to the summary video for Module 1. I know it was a very talky module, but you don't have to worry. The rest of the course is really about all the drawing practical things and not sort of the mental kind of theoretical things that you need to be thinking about. But nevertheless, let's summarize Module 1. Please take notes if you haven't started taking notes already, and let's get right into it. So the first thing we want to just take a quick look at is SFD, or shape, form, detail, and summarize that in our 3-triangle structure, right? And shape being the biggest section, form, and then detail. And this first triangle is kind of art theory, right? How we want to think about the theory of the structure of images, art theory. And also a good way to think about this is how we think, right? And by we, I mean artists. How we think, right? The second triangle is how we create art, right? So this is implementation theory. Implementation, on my handwriting, theory. And really this is that we want to engage in sort of shape, let's put form here first, form and shape thinking at the same time, and then doing the details later. And this is basically how we draw. All right. And then last but not least, this is how the viewer sees, right? How the viewer sees pieces and how we look at art when we're in our appreciative mindset, when we're kind of looking at art that we admire. And it's kind of a 50-50 split between detail and form. The viewer doesn't really notice shape, right? And as we know, shape is extremely, extremely important. I'll re-emphasize, and as we go through the course, you'll realize why. Because shape has everything to do with composition. and it's sort of the hidden reason why artwork looks good, feels good, and communicates certain things. All right. And it even permeates into the form section in terms of light shapes and things like that. And so this is really how people see, right? How people see or view art. Okay, probably things in life as well, but I don't want to get into that. Okay, so that is really our shape, form, and detail theory, and it really structures everything, also implies a workflow, which we'll look at later. So that's that. Okay, let's move this to the side. The next thing is technical skill versus emotional impact, right? So let's put a bubble here, and let's call this one emotional impact. And we'll put another bubble kind of slightly smaller here. Technical skill, right? And the summary of this really is that whilst in an ideal world, you'll want to have a 50-50 split, emotional impact will always be weightier than technical skill. And you definitely see this in a lot of children's books, in a lot of popular cartoons and things. They're very kind of flat, often lacking, but they have a huge emotional impact in the appeal of the structure of the artwork, which often outweighs any kind of technical criteria that they're not meeting. So let's always remember emotional impact is very important. We want to make an emotional impact first when we're thinking and conceptualizing our characters, and then we want technical skill to try to, communicate that to the viewer in the most effective way, right? But a 50-50 would be ideal, that or 100-100 even, but a 50-50 split that you are getting the emotional impact and you're getting the technical skill, and then you should have a really great, well-balanced piece in that regard. All right. Let's move on to the story is everything, right? So I'm just going to write this really big here. Story is everything. All right. So once again, the story being everything is really that the story, the feeling, and the emotion, and the thing itself of the art, right? The concept of the art, the story of that concept, and how it makes people feel, what it communicates to people, the mood, the expression, and all of those things are everything when it comes to the artwork. This obviously does tie into emotional impact, and really the story is everything. If you have a great story, but it's got poor implementation, it's still a great story. Yes, maybe the implementation isn't great, but the story is still great. If you have a very poor story, poor feeling, poor mood, poor emotion, and great implementation, it seems like a dead piece. It seems like a good piece, like sort of in a technical way, but it's kind of dead, and it's not going to enamor anybody or compel them to look longer. And it won't really be a head turner or a popular piece of work, right? It lacks appeal because it doesn't have an appealing story. All right, let's talk about believability versus realism. Now, this is not to say that we don't do realist art, or that we're trying to make our works appear to be in time, in space, in three-dimensionality. No, really, this section is just about having you understand that having a piece of art that is believable outweighs having a piece of art that is extremely realistic. Realistic doesn't equal good. Believability equals good. And the more believable the work is, and the more believable the story is, and the better the story is, and the feeling and the emotional impact, this all aids in the believability of a piece of artwork. You know, being super hyper real, and you've probably seen super hyper rendered 3D models of something, but the model just looks dead. It looks static. Yes, it looks very real, but it doesn't look alive. And all of that stuff comes from the story, the feeling, the emotion, the believability that has been put into the piece of work. And so that's really what that section is about. All right, let's move on to art studies and art creation. Right, so once again, art studies is really just drawings that we do completely without fear, right? Completely without fear for learning, okay? We do these art studies for learning. They are the sketches that we might do at a coffee shop. They're the observational drawings that we do in visual library development, which you'll learn coming up when we're trying to expand our visual library, when we're trying to just kind of understand the world better, observe the world, take reference from the world and understand designs better. They're art studies. I think I spelled that wrong. Studies, right? And really, I don't want you guys to stress about art studies. Just do the studies. It doesn't matter what it looks like. All that matters is that you're observing and that you're learning, right? And then art creation. And the reason that I make this very particular split between the two is that if you've got all these feelings of fear of good drawings and stuff when it comes to art studies, it's going to hinder your learning. You're not going to learn quickly because you're worried about it looking good. You're worried if you're a good artist, you're questioning yourself if you've got any skill or talent at all, if you should be doing this, and so on and so forth. We don't want that. It's messing with our learning speed and our learning progress, right? Now, art creation, yes, there's fear, but art creation really is making good art, right? Making good art. We do want it to look good. We do want it to have appeal, right? And we do want it to have a professional finish. And so it is different from art studies. And you want to learn how to, whoops, I was thinking about the word fear. You want to learn how to avoid being fearful in this stage. And one of the ways we avoid being fearful in art creation is having a solid workflow, right? Having a solid map, knowing what to do when we're creating our art. So when we do make mistakes or we are confused about what to do next, we have the map and we realize, okay, I need to do this, or this can be fixed in this way, right? And then that removes the fear. I mean, a lot of the time, fear comes from not knowing, right? And so with art creation, we have workflows that help you to know exactly what you need to do. All right. And then last but not least, imaginative and observational art. So I'll use this little space at the top here. Imaginative art or imaginative realism, right? Let's call it imaginative realism, is artwork that we do from our imaginations, right? And observational art is pretty much a lot of the time the artwork that you see guys doing on street stalls on the street, copying photos, people copying photos of their family, people doing paintings of their family and little kids and people and things like that, and people just painting landscapes, you know, from the real world, plein air paintings as they call them. That's observational art, right? Observational art is in many ways significantly easier than imaginative realism, because in imaginative realism we need tons of theory, right? Tons of theory so that we can actually understand how to paint these things just without any references if we need to, right? And generally speaking, depending on the type of artist you are, you might work like that, right? And observational artists can really, to a large extent, they can just copy what's in front of them. And also that I think normal people, I say normal people, non-artists don't realize that, you know, observational art is actually fairly straightforward. All you really have to do is observe and recreate exactly what you've observed. Recreate the measurements, recreate the values, recreate the colors, the tones, or whatever the case may be, or the lines, or the edges, or the shapes that you're seeing. Just recreate them in the correct measurements from each other, in the right proportions from each other. And generally, anybody can do this with, you know, a little bit of practice of just copying things, right? And we will be doing some observational art in Visual Library Development in Module 2, right, to help us learn and grow our visual libraries. Nevertheless, you can also get a hybrid of imaginative realism and observational art, where you know all the art theory and all the rules, and then you kind of use an observed thing like a person or a landscape, and you use the imaginative theory to add drama, to amp up and boost the observed world, and you're really going to dramatize what you're seeing. Nevertheless, this course is solidly in the imaginative realism territory, and obviously things like art for animation, pre-visualization, concept art for characters, stylized character designs, you know, manga art, comic art, and stuff like that. So imaginative realism, right? And we are going to be learning this tons of theory, at least in terms of character design. All right, that's about it for this summary video. Let's move on to Module 2. I hope you're excited. It's going to be a really awesome module. Let's get started.